Hey everyone, it's Carter King. If you're an educator, a leader, or just a parent who wants to teach kids about space, check out my newest book, Carter's Journey Through Space. It's available now on Amazon, Target, and bookstores everywhere. Come explore the universe with me.
Welcome to another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle King, and the goal of this podcast is simple: to help you create environments where people thrive. Through real conversations, practical strategies, and powerful stories, we equip leaders, educators, and change makers just like yourself to build cultures rooted in purpose, performance, and authenticity. Because culture isn't something you talk about, it's something you live. This is the Contagious Culture Podcast. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast. My name is Kyle King. I'm your host, and the goal of this podcast is to help you create ecosystems and environments where people thrive, where our companies, our institutions, our schools, and mission-driven organizations have the tools, have the techniques, and the methodologies for them to be able to move change forward. Today's guest is Dr. D. Williams, an executive capacity advisor who partners with boards, presidents, and senior executives to ultimately stabilize leadership capacity, protect decision integrity, and reduce institutional risk during pressure, transition, or disruption. Look, a lot of those words that I just used is some heavy things, but ultimately she's a person that is truly creating change, shifting institutions, and empowering leaders around the world. She served as a nonprofit president and CEO and senior executive, and she's known for naming what most leaders won't say out loud. Leadership risk rarely announces itself. It shows up quietly as decision fatigue, second guessing, stalled execution, and a heaviness that makes leadership cost more energy than it should. And Dr. D. Williams is going to be talking to us about a lot of fun things today, her transitions, her pivots, but then also how she's making ripples of change in our country. Dr. D, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Kyle. How are you? Nice to see you.
You as well. I'm excited. So before we get into all of the meat of the episode and all of the questions that you have no idea what I'm going to ask you today.
No.
Can you just introduce yourself and talk about how you are making change and why you're committed to doing this work?
Absolutely. So I am Dr. D, also Reverend Dr. Darlene Williams, my full name. And my work is really focused on helping individuals understand their grief journey, but not only from an individual perspective, but I like to look at institutions from a larger scale. A little bit about my story and why this work is so passionate for me. Over the past 6 years, my entire childhood family passed away. Transition. So my father, Reverend Brown, passed away in 2019. My mother passed away a year and a half later in 2022. And in 2024, my only sibling passed away in February. And in October of 2024, I became very ill and almost died. So grief and loss and understanding the impact on us related to that is very, very important to me from not only a human perspective, but a leadership perspective. And that's where my focus is for 2026. And I want to explain that.
I love that you first, I want to just say I appreciate your vulnerability, your transparency at the beginning of the episode. Sorry for your loss. And it's beautiful that you're committed to doing this work from your own testimony. A lot of people believe, including myself, until I met you, that grief only shows up when we lose someone physically. But there's so many different layers of grief. Can you define what grief is and how it shows up in multitude of spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. So grief, is not limited to loss of life. Grief includes disenfranchised grief, hidden grief, those things that we don't think about. So loss of anything close to you. So I like to define grief of loss of anything that you loved, that was part of your foundation, was part of your life, but you no longer have access to it. It can be something that has transitioned and it's impossible for you to have access to it, but also it could be something that's still here. that you just don't have access to it. It's distant from you now.
Yeah.
And it shows up in many ways. I'm glad you asked that question, because that's part of my pivot, or the addition to my journey, because it can definitely show up in loss of life and transition, as I like to call it, but also it can show up in us as individuals and leaders, and show up in our body. And I believe that's what happened to me. It showed up in my body from, choosing to be a caregiver, and taking care of my parents, and not paying attention to my body, particularly as a leader, as president and CEO, managing thousands of people and billions of dollars, and not looking and taking the time to say, hey, something changed within me and I need to pay attention to it.
That's good. It's interesting that you even provide that explanation as well as that parallel, because one of the questions that I would love to know is, why does grief oftentimes show up after the crisis or the event, not during it?
Yeah, great question. And that's one of the reasons why I'm focused on institutions, because particularly as leaders, we are trained and programmed to keep going. I was literally taking my work, going to my hospital's bedside. He was in a coma for 2 months, taking his hospital tray with my laptop and working every single day, leaving here 8 o'clock in the morning, coming back at 10 o'clock at night, and working all day by his bedside, caring for him. After my father passed, I did in-home hospice for my mom, and I had her right here in the living room with me. But I was also doing the same thing. I was working while by her bedside. So we're trained and almost rewarded to keep going as leaders, as people. And then when it shows up in our body, and whether it's through anxiety or headaches or depression, things that we ignore, we don't pay attention to it. We just keep going. And that's one of the reasons why my parents aren't here now. If I can say a little bit about them, both of my parents died from 9/11 cancer. My mother, I have 4 people that died from 9/11 cancer, but my mother and father, along with my aunt and my mother's brother, were all at ground zero. Mommy was on the 110th floor. Because my mother was mugged on the subway in 1978, for her chain, my father decided she would never take the subway again to work, and he drove her to work every single day. So, of course, on 9/11, when she walked down from the 110th floor and then walked all the way home to Queens, my father sat down on the other end of the Brooklyn Bridge, watching all the people walk over, waiting for her. So he was there as well. Unfortunately, my mother was forced to go back to work 2 weeks after ground zero. And she went to work every single day, and my father drove her every single day to work. And 20 years later, they passed from 9/11 cancer. Mm-hmm. I bring that up because her trauma was never dealt with. She watched people jump from buildings. She watched people die. She saw smoke. She saw buildings collapse. And she was praised as assistant vice president for 35 years at the organization for her leadership, for coming back to work, to keep going, to be resilient. She got awards. She got accommodations. It was a failure from her organization that cost her life, and my father his life. But what made me stop and pivot from focusing on individuals and grief to 2026 focusing on institutions, because I did the same thing. Wow. Last year, I did the same thing. I went to work when my father was dying. I went to work when my mother was dying, and it almost cost me my life. And now I want to help do something about that, so organizations can really understand the importance of processing grief and loss.
When you say all of that, I feel a multitude of emotions. What would be your message to leaders that are listening in, that are creating this atmosphere and this environment and ecosystem of resiliency and productivity and performance, rather than one that is awarding rest and peace and balance?
Yeah, that's so true. I think we look at it as being the ideal employee. And even if it's your own business, right? It's not just it's for any leader. I would say that it's the invisible cost of doing what we think is the right thing. And it's not the right thing. Not only does it show up in our bodies, but it shows up in our leadership. It shows up in decision fatigue. It shows up in emotional detachment, in risk aversion and recklessness, and overcorrection, burnout that is masked as discipline, turnover that leaders don't understand why there's so much turnover. It shows up in different ways. And I'm focused on large institutions, but also academia as a professor at a few universities. But it shows up in ways that students can disengage, or teachers and faculty members can disengage. There are so many ways that unaddressed trauma and grief and loss can hinder us emotionally, spiritually, and physically.
What do we do? I'm a leader. I work with organizations, and this, across the country, in the nonprofit as well as the educational space. What do we do? We recognize that we still have metrics. We have still goals. We still have to be able to produce revenue and outcomes. But how do we create an atmosphere organizationally that supports these methods as well as beliefs that you have, while still being able to create opportunities of growth?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is that we have to address it. We have to name it. We have to recognize it. When's the last time you went to a meeting and saw on the agenda a question, who's carrying grief that they're not allowed to name? Who is functioning at the edge of collapse because stopping is unrealistic? What will it cost for us, the employer, to focus on what's happening in you before we focus on anything else? So I would say the first thing is to really recognize it and address it, and have wellness policies that care for our employees. With my last organization as president and CEO, I totally rewrote the bereavement policy. Bereavement is the time after someone's passing. Bereavement is not grief. Bereavement is not mourning. There is a difference between the three. Bereavement is the time after the passing. Grief is the period during the passing and what you're going through in your journey. Mourning is how you express it, whether it's with crying or tears or anger. There are three different things. And what I did was I changed the bereavement policy from 3 days immediately after the passing of a loved one that we choose is the loved one you get the days for, to grief days, where my staff were able to take 7 days for up to 2 years after the person passes that they choose was their loved one. And they can use it whenever they want it, whether it was someone's birthday or something that reminded them of that person, whatever it was. So, I think the first thing is understanding that it's there. And then the second thing would be to really reframe how we look at grief and loss, what it is. Because if we do that as employers, as leaders, as executives, we will be able to have such an ecosystem that focuses on minimizing risk that will save revenue and save funding and save dollars.
I like that you put that, because I was coming to that next. Like, what are three practices that I guess can balance or protect the decision making without slowing execution?
Yeah. So, I think really focusing on putting more money into our, whatever we call our HR department these days. So whether it's human capital, which is a derogatory term because people aren't capital, human capital, HR, wellness, even looking at our people that we partner with for EAP, employee assistant programs, because those programs often only focus on grief and loss according to the policies, but they may not focus on all the other things that hidden grief. My mother went to work every day because she thought she had to after being at her job for 35 years. I went to work every day. I was freaking out. How do I stay home after my father passed with another parent and then my sister? But I thought about it. And what stopped me wasn't, what will happen to my job. What stopped me was, if something happens to me, all that will occur is they will replace me.
100%. 100%.
That's it. They will replace me. So we have to stop looking at silence as resilience. It's not the same thing.
It's so interesting that you say that, because I think my generation is approaching work very differently. I grew up with two career parents. My mom she's still grinding and on her career ladder. Father's retired. And what I've realized about her is that, when her mother passed, my grandmother, she was back at work maybe a week later.
Yeah.
When her, her grandson passed, 10 years ago, she was back at work. And she's never really taken time to really be in her feelings, or not be in her feelings, process the various things that she was experiencing, because she believed that I don't have the time to be able to do that. There's goals to meet, especially if you're managing projects and teams at a C-suite executive level. So if a leader says, I don't have time to grieve, what do you say back to them practically?
Yeah, I would say grief left unattended is a liability. It's a liability for so many ways. It's a liability for the organization, and it's a liability for you, for your life. I just went to a service this morning for a 47-year-old woman who passed away suddenly. They were looking for her. She was in her car, deceased. She had a heart attack. And no one knows why, but her, it probably was a lot of stress from what we're seeing. My 51-year-old cousin passed away from a heart attack a couple of weeks ago as well. We're seeing people pass younger and younger. So I would say unresolved grief is a liability, and it's important that we create spaces for grief and not look at it as softness, but it's a mission to make sure that we survive in many ways, more than just physically, but survive emotionally. Because if we're not surviving emotionally, then we're not thriving, and that leaves room for other things.
Earlier, you mentioned that grief it doesn't extend to just loss of life.
Yeah.
Can you give us a definition of how you would define what grief is and what grief is not?
Yes, very good question, Kyle. Grief, I would define as the inability to have contact with something that you love, or something that means, I gotta write that down because I just made that up. Something that you love, something that you're close to. What grief is not is a momentary emotion based on loss.
That's interesting. Oh my God, I feel so much emotion in that response, because I think until we connected and I really started diving deeper into grief, I also was ignorant to only believe that grief was loss of life. But when I had to resign from a position, I recognized, and it took months later, that there was a certain identity that was attached to that industry.
Oh, yes.
There was a certain feeling that it gave me. There was a certain cadence. There was a certain movement and routine and all of these different things. And when I stepped out of that space and created something new or created something different and recognized that I closed that chapter, I didn't recognize what I was going through, but it felt like for a season I was depressed and not understanding how to process through those emotions, because I believe that, I just have to continue to build, create, and figure this out. And until and I just want to give you a testimony here, until talking to you and reading through your resources and having these conversations, it's challenged me to peel back, take rest, and take time to balance and reflect and really recalibrate so that I can really be able to have the time. And it's helped my productivity. It's transformed how I approach my business, how I'm leading my team, and even how I show up for my family. So I just want to thank you publicly. One of the questions that I have, though, you mentioned it earlier, is you mentioned the difference between grieving and mourning. But I would even expand that and ask, what's the difference between, I guess, grieving, mourning, and spiraling? And how can leaders tell the difference between those three?
Yeah. No, another great question. And I just want to put what I said earlier in context. Grief doesn't disappear. And this can answer your question about spiraling. If you think of, I'm doing this with my hand, if you think of grief, this is grief, and it's in a bottle, right? Or in a jar. And we grow and evolve over time. That grief is still there. But the grief gets smaller as we grow. But it doesn't disappear. It stays there. So we learn how to work around the grief. When you hear people say my loved one, my parent, passed away 10, 20 years ago, and it seems like yesterday, that's because it doesn't disappear. It stays there. So, spiraling would be living in that moment and not evolving as a person. I had someone say to me, she's a minister in my church, and she said, we don't backslide. All we have to do is stay still. And as the world passes by and we stay still, we're not backsliding. We're just not moving, right? That's how I would define grief and spiraling. It's not allowing ourselves to evolve because of the grief we've gone through, expecting it to go away. I do not believe that there are stages of grief that are linear. We don't go through things in a linear way. You can have denial, acceptance, anger in different segments at different times.
I appreciate you saying that, because a lot of people, all right, I'm in this stage. All right, that's the 3-week stage. All right, now I'm in this stage. It doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like that. No, your journey is unique.
Yeah.
Your experience is unique, and that is very important to understand. And you may not even go through those stages. I'm coming up, January 30th is the 3rd anniversary of my mother's passing, and it seems like it was yesterday. Right? I don't know what stage I'm in, if anything at all, but I know I'm functioning and I'm going through my journey my way. So grief is the period of time that you're going through your journey, your feelings. Bereavement is the period of time right after that loved one passes. But mourning is those stages of grief. How are you expressing it? Are you crying? Are you angry? Are you just silent? Do you need time to yourself? Are you meditating? That's your mourning time. And that can last for years.
Hey, it's Kyle. Sorry to interrupt your programming, but I got a quick culture check for you. How's your team's energy right now? I mean, literally, right now. Are people feeling inspired? Or are they just showing up? See, here's the truth. Culture doesn't change because we talk about it. It changes because we live it actively every single day. And that's what I help organizations do. Build contagious cultures that people actually want to be a part of. Through keynote talks, interactive trainings, and hands-on consulting, I help leaders transform the way their teams connect, perform, and grow. So if your culture needs a little bit of spark, let's light it up together. Visit theculturelab.org, again, theculturelab.org, or connect with me directly on LinkedIn at Kyle S. King to learn more about how we can work together. Because remember, your culture is contagious. Make it worth catching. Now let's get back to the program. It's interesting, and maybe this question is for me. As a leader that recognizes that grief is inevitable, how do I best support my team on those days? Maybe there's, someone on my team that did lose someone. Respectfully, without crossing boundaries, do we send flowers on that day to that person? Do we encourage that person on that day? Do we bring it up and make it a part of our culture? How do we support our teams and our colleagues in those seasons where we even know and we're aware that they're going through a grieving process?
Yeah. I think this speaks to overall leadership and emotional intelligence. And understanding our team, because just like with any relationship, it's very hard to know how to respond, how to work with someone if you don't know that person. And getting to know them when they're grieving, I think of my husband and I and the 5 love languages, right? We're complete opposites. When I need time, I would rather be around everyone. Bring the kids, bring the grandkids when I'm feeling sad. He wants to go off and play golf and be by himself. So it's the same thing with grief. You have to, there's no right or wrong. It's a matter of having that EI and understanding the person. And if you don't know, ask. because the last thing you want to do is do something that is not what they need or not what they want.
That's good. What do you wish, if it could be anything, what do you wish that organizations understood about grief before they lose those great leaders like yourself and various people?
You know, I wish they understood that everyone's going to have their time on that front row. There's not going to be one person that's not going to go through that. And to ensure that we have more human-centered policies and approaches to what someone goes through versus being 100% focused on everything else. Because when you use the word human capital, which I don't like, humans are capital, because without the people, your business will not run. No matter what we do with AI, you do need a person for something. So I wish organizations would understand that and find a way that works within their mission, their business structure, to ensure that we are able to keep the business afloat, of course, but still be more compassionate, sensitive, and human-centered when it comes to our employees.
Now, let me ask you this, and we touched on it a little bit earlier. When I think about healthy grief culture within a high-performing team or organization, what does that look like?
Yeah, healthy grief culture. I would really say my policy, the grief days, definitely, shifted the perspective for the staff members. They were able to really focus on, and not even having to explain. Of course, you want to have parameters in place in your SOP so that, things aren't taken advantage of, but really understanding that today may just be a day that I just can't get up and go to work. So understanding that. Having a culture that speaks to the needs of people. I think especially, my parents and my sister passed during COVID, right? It wasn't because of COVID, but it was also during that time. Mm-hmm. So having policies and a culture that understands that things shift and change every day, and being a little bit more flexible with that in a way that speaks to the need of especially your leader, especially the leaders in the organization.
This has been amazing. This is good.
Great questions, Kyle.
I was ready for you. I'm ready for this conversation because I think this is one of those conversations and even topics that isn't talked about enough organizationally. It was never talked about when I was in corporate or when I was in education. And as someone that's leading a company, I need to be more aware of what my organization and team members need. But then also be mindful and have that EI enough to understand what I need in these spaces as well. We're going to shift it a little bit and go to a rapid fire exercise. I have some questions in front of me.
Yes, get ready.
This should be fun. So I'm going to give a statement and I just want you to finish the statement.
Okay.
So grief most often sounds like what?
Silence.
The cost of ignoring grief is?
Financial.
A grief-informed leader does?
Care and compassion.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay. Wow. One boundary every grieving leader needs is?
Time.
When you think of those 4 statements, what one spoke the most to you and you believe leaders needed to hear?
The boundaries. Because a lot of times our teams perform because they feel that we want them to. Mm-hmm. And if they didn't feel the pressure, they may take the time for their grief. And oftentimes, I believe that people think that we won't appreciate or acknowledge their grief. Who am I to say that the loss of something that I may not be aware of is not valid because it's not the loss of life? I think back to, my father when he was in the hospital. We had to amputate his leg before he passed while he was in the hospital. That was more of a grief situation for him than knowing that his life was ending. He was more concerned with that. I would also say that the future does not belong to the leader who endures the most pain. It didn't for my parents. My parents endured a lot of pain, and they lost their life because of it. When I think of what you mentioned earlier, and you have me thinking of a couple of different things. My husband just retired from 29 years of working for NYPD as a chief. When I see him now and the things that he's doing, yes, he's out there playing golf. Yes, he's out there having fun with his friends. But I believe he's grieving because he's not out there going to work every day for 29 years. So these are the things that we don't think about. So I would hope that we recognize disenfranchised grief. The staff member who is going through infertility, the staff member who just lost a child, the person who just lost a pet. We are not in a position where we can say that your grief is not as valid as mine or not as important. So I wish that we would recognize that as leaders and as organizations.
I really appreciate you giving the example of pets, because I recognized about 6 months ago that I needed to work on empathizing with people that are pet people rather than, because I'm not that guy. Because I was in the middle of a meeting and a colleague of mine pulled out their phone. It was the vet and leaving a voicemail. And you know how you could like look at the voicemail with the words, and she just recognized that her dog passed away while being at the vet and just started busting out crying.
Yeah.
And I'm just not the cry in the workplace type of guy. And she said, and I felt some type of way for that moment. I just, in my head, I'm like, this is so unprofessional. And it took me having a conversation with someone that is a pet person and recognize that that's how that's like a child.
Absolutely.
For them, it may not be for you. So I really wanted to circle back to when you said earlier, like it takes emotional intelligence as a leader to understand that this may not be your love. This may not be connected to you, but that person is grieving something. Do you believe that everybody's going through a grieving season?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We're all going through a grieving season, whether it's loss of life or disconnection. People who don't have relationships with children, with parents, who never have relationship with absentee parents. Those are all things that we grieve. And there isn't one thing that I can think of that I can say honestly is more important than the other, because it's all relative to that person. And when you think about it, our bodies, our mind, our spirit, they're only designed to hold but so much. I definitely believe God doesn't give us more than we can bear. Yeah. But if we don't intervene before we get to that point, what's the cost for that person? Yeah. Spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and how does that show up? So to the example, I wasn't a pet person before I had my first animal, and that animal passed away. And now I have another one, a dog. The animal's a dog. But I never thought that I would grieve and be so sad because that dog passed away. It was an emotional day for me. Yeah. So as leaders, we definitely, it's just like culture. We can't impose our culture on someone else, because what's important to us may not be important to them. But that's not for us to decide, especially when someone is grieving.
Do you believe that it's hard, the longer that you stay, the longer that you grieve, the harder it is for you to get out of that season?
No, I believe that we stay in a state of grief. It just has different levels. And each level is different. I had a client whose daughter passed away at 32 years old from cancer. And she literally could not leave her house for months. I mean, she could not leave her house. It was months before she left her bedroom. It cost her family, it cost her marriage, it cost her children. she's still grieving, but she's out of that stage. So I believe that grief always stays with you. It's just in different stages of how you mourn, how you show it, how it's demonstrated.
Can we unpack that for a second? When I think about someone in that circumstance, and I have my mind on someone that you maybe just hit the nail on the coffin, somebody that I believe is grieving, they just haven't placed it yet. Mm-hmm. In situations like that, what's the first step that someone takes?
Yeah. So coming from the social service point of view, you have to make sure that homicide and suicide are not at play, right? So that's the first thing. And there is a training called mental health first aid. And the mental health first aid training is a free training all across the United States. And it teaches you how to directly ask the question, are you thinking of harming yourself or anyone else? You directly ask that question. Once you get the answer to that question, obviously, if it's yes, then you take the necessary precautions. But if it's no, then you need to make sure that that person is able to go through conversations about their grief, and you have to know when to refer, because there's a distinct difference between coaching and counseling, and making sure that that person doesn't need to have counseling from a clinical perspective. But I would say, for that person, she was able to get out of that situation, but it took getting her to some clear clinical counseling.
I'm grieving, and not to the point where I can't leave my house, but small things, identity, identifying that I was maybe once a coach and I'm not that coach, or recognizing that I maybe one time was the breadwinner in my household and am not anymore. Recognizing that I was something at one point and no longer in my head that something anymore. What do I do, Dr. Williams?
Yeah. So I have one of my frameworks called the Lifequake framework. Very good, Kyle. And the Lifequake framework takes us to 3 stages, and you just got to the 3rd stage. One is, acknowledging the Lifequake. What is it that happened, right? And the happening is the shift in your professional career. The second thing is reframing what happened. So thinking about, how can I change my perspective? Because it's all how we look at it. How can I change my perspective to change how I'm looking at this? But the 3rd phase is really rebuilding. So if there's an earthquake and you have to leave your home because of the earthquake, when it's safe, what's the first thing you're going to do?
Go back to your home.
Go back to your home and assess the damages.
Yeah.
So if we have a lifequake, something that happened to us, how often do we come back inside eternally and assess the damages?
Oh, that's good. That's good.
What did we do? What did we lose? How did it impact us? How did it hurt us? And where? What parts of us? We were made of our spirit, our soul, our emotions. So we have to assess the damages, but also figure out where it impacted us. And then we have to go to the rebuilding stage. So to your example, once you assess how that loss of income, the repositioning of your position, how it impacted you, we now have to figure out how to rebuild. And rebuild could not mean putting it back together the same way. It could be doing something completely different, but it's unique for each person. So assess the lifequake. What was the event that happened? Reframe how we're looking at it, and then go in and assess how it impacted you and start your rebuilding process.
It's interesting, because when you say something like that, it's great in theory. And there's somebody on here that's going to listen to the replay, or even when this goes live, and they're like writing it down and they're wanting to implement it. But do you ever do events or in-person things where I could come in and work with you or work with a community of people so that we could be able to go a little bit deeper with this?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm in New York City. So we're having a major event January 31st right here near JFK Airport. It's called the Leadership Reset, and it's really focused on helping leaders, entrepreneurs, business owners, even faith leaders who are stuck and they have hidden grief that they haven't really addressed. And we want to make sure that we start the year addressing that, going through the Lifequake framework so that we can name it, we can assess it and we can start rebuilding so that you don't go through 2026 carrying that unhidden grief throughout the whole year. So we are intentionally doing that at the beginning of the year. And then our second event is in March 20th and 21st. That one is going to be 2 days of taking a critical deep dive into the 3 frameworks that we have. So the LifeQuake framework, the G3 framework, which is grief, grit, and grace. So looking at grief, talking about our grit, which I identify grit as what my parents did and what I did going back to work, but also grace, making sure that we give ourselves grace. I feel like we give so many other people grace. Sure, no problem. It's okay. Don't worry about it. But do we give ourselves that same amount of grace?
Yeah, that's good.
And then, my 2014 framework from my first book, The Freedom Positioning System, that framework focuses on freeing you from things that you don't even know are holding you back. It's 10 chapters about freedom from the approval of others, freedom from unrealistic expectations, freedom from anger, unforgiveness, all those things that if you go through a grief journey, they can impact how you go through that journey or stop you. And you don't even realize it. So March 20th and 21st in New York City, 2 days of major transformation, and January 31st.
Now, let me ask you this. If I'm listening in, is there a certain demographic in regards to age or race, or does grief show up kind of differently with each age group? Like, who would be your target person that you would want to be in the room, rather than like, have I already identified that I have grief that I'm dealing with? Who is that ideal person?
Yeah, so our ideal person are really leaders, entrepreneurs, people that have responsibility, and grief is hindering them away, that is keeping them stuck and unable to move forward in their journey, in their business, in their as an entrepreneur. But there's a cost involved. But I think for leaders, it's not just you, it's the people under you.
That's good.
So it impacts your team. So those are the people that we want to have in that room.
Do I bring my team, or is this something that I deep dive just individually first and then bring the information back to my team?
If someone on your team is a leader and they are going through a grief journey, then they should be in that space.
That's good. What's next for you? Let's say 12 months from now, 2 years from now, where do you see yourself? What are some initiatives that you would want to be able to create, or amount of people that you want to be able to impact?
Yeah, what's next for me is working with organizations, complex organizations on a large scale. During COVID, I was CPO and COO for the largest homeless shelter, transitional and supportive housing in New York City. And I literally had to write the whole COVID policies from scratch to keep our clients safe, our staff safe, and the community around us. So my focus and goal is to work with large organizations to help them not only through crisis situation, but before crisis. So they can have some risk mechanisms in place to stop this from impacting them before it happens.
If you had 60 seconds to share a message with people that are walking on their grief journey, that recognize today, after listening to you, that they're experiencing grief, whether at a small scale or a large scale, what would be your message to them?
Great question. I would say, I stand here and I'm alive today, not because I was stronger than grief, but because I finally stopped pretending that silence meant leadership. My parents didn't get that chance. Too many other leaders don't get that chance. So I don't believe my work is about my story. I think it's about making sure that fewer leaders die quietly doing meaningful work. Because I don't think any mission should have a body as collateral damage. No mission is worth the body. No institution should demand sacrifice and refuse to name it.
Dr. D, where can we find you online, and how can we support you?
So you can reach me at drdarlenewilliams.com. That's my website, drdarlenewilliams.com, or simply email me at drd@drdarlenewilliams.com.
Dr. D, I appreciate you so much. And I just thank you for listening, for giving us your heart, for giving us not just wisdom, but practical strategies and techniques and frameworks where if we implement these, we can not just be better for ourselves, but it will allow us to empower others, our teams, our colleagues, or even our families. To everyone listening, what I want you to do is I want you to protect your capacity like it's your job, because it is. And if this episode helped you, share it with a leader who's carrying something, who's carrying even a little bit, a lot, that's ultimately probably carrying too much. And we'll see you next time on the Contagious Culture Podcast. But one of the questions that we want to leave you with, what type of culture are you spreading? The energy you bring is the culture you create. Make yours worth catching. My name is Kyle King. It's the Contagious Culture Podcast. We'll see you all next episode. Thanks for tuning in to the Contagious Culture Podcast. If this episode challenged or inspired you, hey, take a second to share it with someone who's building culture in their world. Make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps more leaders, educators, and change makers just like yourself join the movement. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or YouTube at Kyle S. King for more tips, tools, and methodologies to be able to help you create this ecosystem of absolute excellence. Until next time, lead boldly, live intentionally, and remember, your culture is contagious. Make it worth catching.